there are these niches that seem small from the outside on the internet, these communities that have been built that are massive and engaged and powerful, and they're kind of driving culture.
As humans, our earliest and most enduring form of communication is the story. Today, massive publishers earn billions a year, but are disconnected from what readers want and have little influence over which books hit the bestseller list. In the process, authors without platforms lose out, and the best stories often go untold. Today, we're talking to Matt Kaye, CEO of Bindery Books, who is taking everything he's learned in his career in publishing and technology to completely reimagine the publishing industry from the ground up. This is the art of building. Hi, I'm Kate McAndrew, general partner and co-founder of Baukunst, and today I am here in the studio with Matt Kaye, CEO and co-founder of Bindery Books. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to start by dropping into who was little Matt, right? So Matt is a kid, and I'm really curious about what you were like and if there were any premonitions of what you might become.
Yeah, I was a nerd. I was a shy little kid who loved getting lost in books. I credit my mom for that a bit. She was a middle school English and history teacher, and I was a middle child and no one else in my family got interested in books. I did. I loved fantasy. I got into reading all of my parents' books, which were like Michael Crichton and Anne Rice and John Grisham and all that kind of stuff in middle school. And then, I went to college, was an English major. From there, I learned that I never wanted to be a writer. I tried writing and was like, oh, I hate this. This is not who I am. But I love books, so I tried publishing and, joined my first publisher 21 years ago now at this indie publisher in the East Bay, and then worked my way up to my dream job in New York. I was the senior publicist at Farrar, Straus & Giroux, really prestigious publisher working on Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winning authors. At the worst possible time I ever could have done that. It was 2007, 2009, the recession hit, media collapsed, the Kindle came out, the mood was apocalyptic, and I decided that the future was going to be in tech, the future of books, not in traditional publishing. So I jumped to the tech world. I was in Amazon Books for 4 years in product, went to a startup called Inkshare, was at Trulia, and then was head of product at Patreon, kind of at the epicenter of the creator economy. With the perfect vantage point to connect the dots between what I was seeing at Patreon with these big creators and their massive communities, and that big gap between the authors with amazing books and the readers who want to read them, and the impossibility of them meeting each other.
And in some ways, if you could reverse engineer the perfect background to start Bindery, that would be it. Perhaps with Meg's balancing experience at the largest book packager.
Yeah.
But clearly those collective experiences contributed to really what I think Bindery is, which is a complete kind of reimagining or re-architecture of how this whole industry works. I mean, it is the textbook design thinking of take the thing that's broken and inefficient and not serving people and reimagine it, from the ground up with tech as the pipes. Yeah. So what's the one-liner on what Bindery is today?
Bindery is a platform that turns book influencers, tastemakers into publishers. I mean, we do that by creating a space for them to cultivate their communities in a similar way that Substack does with writers or Patreon for podcasters. And the beauty of that is we get to see which communities are really thriving, which doesn't mean it's the people with the biggest followers. It could be people that just have inspired people through their tastes. And I think that should be the requirement for who gets to decide what to publish.
So I want to talk about what the world will look like if Bindery is a wild success, but I feel like a lot of people don't actually have a functional understanding of what the book world looks like today. Yeah. So kind of give us a state of the industry, which I would call the legacy industry that Bindery is disrupting. What is the state of today in books?
Yeah, so there's a lot that happens in between somebody writing a book and then a reader reading it. The person who writes the book, the author, today largely has to go find an agent. So they find a literary agent who will represent them, and that allows them to get their book in front of major publishers. Almost all books sold today are published by 5 big publishers in New York. That used to be dozens a few decades ago, and it's consolidated like other media industries into 5. One of them, Penguin Random House, I think does over half of them or something.
And their annual revenue is huge.
Yes.
Give us a sense of magnitude.
So the revenue of the fifth biggest publisher is over $1 billion a year in sales in the US. Like the market as a whole is $80 billion. Not only is book sales really big, they're the seed of culture. So I think half of all TV shows and movies are based on books. Like that is where stories originate. That's the proving ground to see people love them. So the impact culturally and the financial scale of this industry is massive. It's just massive.
But what's so interesting is authors are really not getting paid.
Oh no.
Lest we be confused.
Right. So going through the whole process, which is fascinating. You find an agent after writing this book. You wrote the book, you're like, oh God, I did it. And this is an amazing moment. Maybe it takes you a couple of years to get an agent. You're querying hundreds of people maybe. You get an agent, they shop it for maybe another year or two. You get a deal. That's incredible. One of these 5 publishers have picked you up and you think you've made it. Your book then goes through an editorial process, a design process to make it its sort of final form. It's probably another 2 to 3 years before the book is in bookstores. So there's like many, many years between you writing it, which maybe you wrote it because of the world around you, and that world is like gone at that point. So that speed is a big problem. And publishers, going back a couple decades, when I first joined publishing, had a much better ability to market books than they do today. So there were, let's say, 100 book review editors at the top 100 newspapers in the country who reviewed all the new releases. And that was my first job in publishing 20 years ago, was being a publicist who would get them the new books and convince them they should cover it. I think there's 2 book review editors left in the country now. That whole world of publicizing books and book review sections and all of that is gone. So publishers now acquire a book and they hope that influencers talk about it. They hope that booksellers respond to it. What this means is like 1 out of every 100 books do anything. Like 90% of all books published sell less than 2,000 copies. And so the publishing industry works actually for publishing, for the publishers. They make money, they're profitable. Most authors are totally screwed. And it's hard to imagine an industry more out of touch with what's actually happening in the world if it takes that long to get a story in front of people. And what are the stories that aren't getting picked up? And what are the stories that are getting published but then fall into the void? And that's the problem that has fascinated me my entire career, is what happens between the story and the person whose life is changed by reading it. Like, what are all those things in between that make that more equitable, that get the stories that deserve to be out there, and to have a business that's more responsive to what's actually happening in the world?
I think something that you're pointing to, like I know to be true about you as someone who gets to work with you on this business, which is I feel like you are like an expert in the business as an organism, right? Like the way that you operate, like you even just like you don't do a typical board deck, you do a board doc, but like the way that it's organized, the density of it, the way that you lead, like all of that, like I feel like you have been a student of what great companies look like, what great teams look like, and you're doing it now in this context, which is all about enabling the world of books that you maybe always dreamed of, right? That is about the story. And so I think it's really beautiful to get to watch kind of those things overlay themselves, right? The like getting to the dream party of publishing of like, I'm here for the stories, man, like, let's go. And then kind of seeing the way that attention to how does a great business run overlapped with your passion. It's something that I notice in you that I'm kind of hearing come out in how you talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is like with a business, what is the kind of change you want to bring into the world? And I think the change that you can create by having stories connect with people is a really powerful and good business. And I feel like these companies are only tackling like pieces of it. And so I feel like, you know, one thing I look at is what is the kind of world you're trying to build, and that should be hopefully a world that's good and a world you want to live in, and a huge, huge opportunity that's being completely underserved. Like I think I saw this at Patreon really powerfully. When I joined in 2019, I didn't really understand the scale of it. You know, I think I looked at the kinds of creators who were on it and I was like, oh, they look like interesting. And then you get there and you're like, oh my God, this podcaster is earning $1 million a month. That there are these niches that seem small from the outside on the internet, these communities that have been built that are massive and engaged and powerful, and they're kind of driving culture. And that was the aha moment to find. It was sort of like, okay, you have all these authors who are underserved, you have these readers who aren't finding books they love, and then there's this sort of messy middle that has just been exploited and ravaged and consolidated. And that was when I saw the power of what the internet has done for communities to connect. I was like, oh, like that's the connection point. Like you have these rabid communities who want great art to exist in the world and are willing to pay for it. And they know better than anybody else. And who's going to lead them? Well, the people that are leading the communities are these creators online. And that's one of the, of all the good and bad things the internet has done, enabling this new generation of creators to sort of define what art can be and what it should be, has been one of the most like fascinating and like liberating things I've seen, and all the sort of ravaging of other kinds of creative spaces.
Do you remember where you were when you had the aha moment?
I had insomnia. Was what I had. Because they tell the story like maybe with a little less nuance than the reality of it. But I met my co-founder for a lunch when she was in town while I was still at Patreon. We're just talking about the industry and talking about influencers in the space and what I was seeing at Patreon and what she was seeing in publishing. And there was this kind of like little tingle or like tug or like this electricity, and it was like, there's something here. And we like emailed immediately afterwards. We're like, okay, you kind of felt that too. There's something here. We're like kind of circling on something. And then we had a couple calls where we're like, there's something really interesting here, but it was sort of unformed. There was this sense that, the model behind Patreon could power a different kind of publishing ecosystem that wasn't as horrible to authors and could be more democratizing. I was up in the night thinking about it. Like I woke myself up at like 2 a.m. and was like piecing those puzzle pieces together. And the moment I had this thought where like these people could actually lead their own publishing imprints and we could enable that, my mental immune system attacked it and like tried to find the hole and the flaw. And after attacking it for like an hour or two, it was like, oh, maybe there's a thing. And
this is the seed.
Yeah, and there's like a lot was unclear about how it was all going to work. But from there, Megan and I had a thing we could like, I think seed's the exact word, like it planted in our minds and then became an obsession. We had to do it. It was like there's no better people, no better moment. It just felt exactly right.
And one of the things that really shocked me when we were, a lot of things shocked me when we dug into diligence, right? Mm-hmm. When we met you, when we're looking at investing, like one, I had no idea that like the big five were doing billions in revenue, mm-hmm. right? Like that was surprising to me. I didn't realize how big books were and how much they were growing. Yeah. The other thing that really shocked me was I didn't understand that influencers like held the keys to the bestseller list, right? Because it's really relatively recent that you've had influencers really driving the value in book sales and in IP. So I'm curious about like the why now and like why you think this is the time.
When you work somewhere like Patreon, when I worked there, and if you work at YouTube, you know this. If you work at Instagram or TikTok, you know this. These people are massive and so powerful. And every industry, has them at their core now. Like if you're in beauty, if you're in fashion, like if you're in entertainment, your influencers are your main way of getting your message out there. And in publishing, they recognize their power. They didn't realize like what that power could become. I remember the first conversation I had with a book influencer where I pitched the idea, who's now about to publish his third book.
With Bindery.
With Bindery. He was stunned. Like it was an incredible, I'll never forget this conversation where I was like, I'm thinking about this idea, you have these, podcasters on Patreon becoming their own podcast networks and YouTubers becoming their own video networks. And like, it makes sense to me that this is the evolution of what you're doing. And he was like, you don't understand how undervalued I feel and underpaid. And I'm selling so many books for these publishers. And it's through my taste and my ability to get people excited about it that they're doing as well as they are. And I get nothing. And the idea that you're like even considering that I could be more than just somebody who makes like fun book videos, it changed his life.
I think the other thing is that you had a little bit of a hill to climb because there's a perception bias that anything that's not the big five is indie. Yeah. Right? And I think you guys came out of the gate and really established credibility very quickly.
It
I'm going to speak to that.
kind of.
Or that's my perception.
I mean, there was a really there was one really rough moment when we announced, and I think you may remember this a bit, but it was a really scary moment that I think has come to define us a little bit, where we were working on this MVP. We had all the influencers like signed up and ready to join. And we got this exclusive story put into Publishers Weekly about what we were doing. And our site was beautiful. And it was ready to accept waitlist people who wanted to join. And we didn't probably put as much info for authors as we should have. I think there was an assumption that, like, given our experiences and what we had laid out in the terms, that people would kind of trust that we were legit and we had a distributor. Like, all the things were in place. But social media grabbed that story and turned it into something really ugly, where they just were convinced that this was a scam. They were convinced it was predatory. They were convinced and so just like spread and risk tarnishing our influencers, and some of them were like thinking about backing out. And so there's this moment for Meg and I to decide what are we gonna do? This can't like die before it's off the ground. And what we decided to do was is like a value of ours that we had there before we even started, was this idea of like transparency. Publishers aren't transparent. They don't share terms. They don't share anything. They don't have to. People feel like they need them. So we shared everything. We just put it on the site, and then we started doing lives with all of our influencers. I played with the idea of making content myself, and then had our social media person be like, Matt, you're not good at that. Put it down. But do some lives. Like, you're human, and you're doing this for the right reasons, and get out there. And we just did so many of them. And people were super tuned in and paying attention to all the details until they didn't care anymore. And they're like, okay, they're real.
Right.
They're legit. And so we I think had to put ourselves out there as the humans we are with the intentions we have. And it totally shifted the course and probably made us get a lot more attention than we would have otherwise. And maybe it was better for us in the end. Our waitlist exploded, and we got some really major people, and really quickly through all of like the drama that we were seeing on social media. We're now, I don't want to brag too much, but like we're darlings in social media. We have people that are really beloved working with us. We publish books that are really good and are doing really well, and they're like, oh, you're real, and it makes sense how your model is going to be better for authors than the 1 out of 100 thrown into the void model of traditional publishing.
And I think you've gone from sort of like the seed of inspiration to finding the team that's going to manifest it, to getting the resources to galvanize it. And now, like, you're publishing books and people are on this. I mean, it's alive, as they say. It's very much alive. Yeah. And, IP rights are getting sold, and it's just, it's humming. And I'm curious, fast forward 10 years from now, dropping into what the world of books or the world of story or the world of publishing will be like when Bindery is a wild success. Like, what do you see?
Yeah, I want books to be weirder and better. Like, I just love this idea of, instead of Big Five publishing, on Bindery there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of publishing imprints doing all kinds of things that publishers don't believe are a big deal now. There's so many examples of publishing missing the boat on genres entirely, like romance, they were late to, urban fiction, late to, still don't publish a lot of that, most of that's self-published. There are all these reader markets and kinds of stories that don't exist now because of how publishing is structured. And if in 10 years we are one of the biggest publishers, but not in this monolithic way, but as like the platform underneath which this like whole garden of publishers are just able to grow and build careers doing this, I think it would be a really beautiful thing. And because books are just so important for driving overall culture, that democratization, that decentralization of who gets to decide what gets the resources of publishing, shifting in that way, I think could be really powerful.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming to the studio today. It was really fun to drop in with you. And if folks want to follow along, you can follow binderybooks.com. You can follow me, Kate, on LinkedIn or TikTok, or follow baukunst.co. And we hope to see you soon.